Good morning, everyone. Professor Sexton here, and this is our Wednesday, January 6th lecture, which is on sentence types, writing introductions, body paragraphs and transitions, and writing conclusions. There are four documents and course documents that covers all of this information. So what I'm going to be doing in this lecture, just to keep it brief, I'm going to bring up those documents and I'm just going to talk a little bit about key things that I want you to pay attention to as you're reading them. I definitely advise you to read all four of them carefully for yourself, word for word, because in this lecture, I'm not going to be able to go over all the details of them to keep it under time. Also, I need to let you know I've not graded any of the quizzes or discussion boards just yet. This week is a somewhat chaotic week for me because I'm also doing this seminar in the afternoons. So a lot of my time is taken up, but I do plan on in the next few days, hopefully by Friday, to get on those and start grading those. So I apologize for that. So let's begin by bringing up the sentence types document first. So here you go. Let me enlarge this. So, sentence types. First of all, let me begin by saying that in order to understand sentence types, you need to understand clauses. And what clauses are, it's a group of words that have both a subject and a verb. However, there are two types of clauses. There's an independent clause, and an independent clause conveys complete idea or thought, which means that it can stand by itself. Such as if you had the sentence, the flowers are beautiful. The flowers is your subject, are is your verb, but in itself, that sentence makes sense. A dependent clause has both a subject and a verb, but for numerous reasons, it does not convey a complete thought. So, for instance, in the next one, you have because they brighten the room. So, you have both the subject, they, and the verb brighten, but because of that word because, this group of words in itself is not a complete thought. So, that makes it a dependent clause. So it's very important to know the difference between an independent clause and a dependent clause, because what that'll do is help you identify the four sentence types. So here are the four sentence types. A simple sentence has one independent clause. So if you go back to that example, the flowers are beautiful. It has one subject, one verb, stands by itself. Now, simple sentences can be long because they can have a lot of additional information in them. So if you look at the example, China's Han Dynasty marked an official recognition of Confucianism. That's a simple sentence. I mean, it's long, but it has one subject and one verb. So that makes it a simple sentence. A compound sentence, what it does is it combines two simple sentences, and it combines them by using something called a coordinating conjunction. There are seven: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. However, keep in mind that these conjunctions don't all mean the same thing. For instance, and is similarity, but and yet is contrast or is option. And that there actually is a handout that I have that explains the different coordinating conjunctions. So I'll make sure that I'll upload that to course documents so that you can have it. But simply the thing is with a compound sentence, you combine two simple sentences with a coordinating conjunction. There is a punctuation rule that you should know here, that when you do that, you need a comma before the coordinating conjunction. So look at this example here. The clown frightened the girl, comma, and she ran off screaming. So that's a compound sentence. A complex sentence, what it does is it's a sentence that has a dependent clause and an independent clause. So for instance, if you look at this one, after Mary added up the cells, that's a dependent clause because of that after. She discovered that she was short, that's an independent clause. But I can combine these two together. Likewise, if you look at the second one, Julio received the job. That's an independent clause. Because he interviewed better than everyone else, that's a dependent clause. So once again, I can combine those two together. There's a punctuation note that you should see here. When the dependent clause is first, then you put a comma before the independent clause. when the independent clause is first, you don't need a comma between the independent clause and the dependent clause. Okay, last one. The last one, this is the most complicated of all of them. It's a complex compound sentence where it will have multiple independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. And honestly, I don't see a lot of these sentences in real life. So in all the different essays that I read, I rarely come across a complex compound sentence, but here's an example. While Tom reads novels, dependent clause, Jack reads comics, independent clause, but Sam only reads magazines, another independent clause. The main reason why I'm telling you about these sentence types is it's not that I just want you to know them, I want you to use them in your writing. Because what you want to avoid when you're writing your essays, you want to avoid using the same type of sentences over and over again, because that becomes monotonous, particularly if you are relying just on simple sentences. If you have an essay where all the sentences are just 4 or 5 words long, that becomes very choppy, it becomes monotonous. So when you have topics or ideas that are closely related to each other, what you need to do is find ways to combine them. So if they're similar or contrast, you can do a compound sentence. Or if you want to show a contrast in thoughts, like for instance, since it was raining, comma, we didn't go to the park. You can use a complex sentence. So the main reason why I want you to know about these is not just so you can know them, but to improve your writing. Because a lot of things that happens in terms of grading essays, sometimes essays can have the same ideas, but also the grade depends on the sophistication of how those ideas are presented. So a student can write a paper with the same ideas as another student, but let's say one student's essay is composed of nothing but simple sentences, and another student's essay has a variety of sentences. The student who has that variety of sentences is going to earn a higher grade than the student who's just given the simple sentences. So that's one of the things that you want to pay attention to as you're writing and as you're constructing your own papers. There is a quiz on sentence types. It is multiple choice. And so what will happen with that quiz is you'll have a different sentence and you'll have to identify what type it is. Make sure that you read those sentences carefully. And what you may want to do is you may also want to have this sentence type document open up. You can open it up, save it to your computer, and toggle back and forth between the two. Okay, so now let's move to writing introduction. So this is the body part of it. Writing introductions can always be tricky, just because usually it's very hard to start a paper. And if you think about it this way, logically, it doesn't make sense to write the introduction first, because what an introduction is, you're introducing the paper. But if you think about it, how can you introduce a paper that you have not written? And I think oftentimes that's when we struggle with writing introductions. So let me give you 2 pieces of advice here about writing introductions. If you feel like for your papers you can't get started, most of the times when we feel that way is because we're struggling with writing the introduction. So one piece of advice that I would offer you is this: skip writing the introduction and just go into the body paragraphs. Write the body paragraphs, write the conclusion, and then come back and do the introduction last once you have the entire paper. Because once you have the entire paper, you're better equipped to introduce that paper. However, if you're one of those people who cannot write the paper without having an introduction at first, do a very simple introduction. Don't super stress about it. Just put some words down on the page and then move on. And then also when you come back, go back and reread the introduction to make sure it works with the paper that you've written. Let me give you some things that an introduction should have. Generally, an introduction should have 3 parts. It's the lead, the bridge, and the thesis. What a lead does is it's something that grabs your reader's attention. And there's like 3 different types of leads, like a funnel lead, a descriptive lead, and an anecdote lead. These type of leads will depend on what type of paper that you're writing. So like for instance, a funnel lead will start from this very big topic like love. Love is a big topic, but what you might do is you might start with love and then you might narrow that concept of love down to something very manageable and approachable that you can use, like the love of a father for a son. So something like that. A descriptive lead paints a picture in the reader's head. Um, and it can work as, once again, it depends on what type of paper that you're writing. And then the other one is an anecdote. And what an anecdote is like a brief story or an incident that introduces your topic. When it comes to leads, you're really going to have to decide. It really a lot depends on the type of paper that you're writing and what your topic is and how you want to begin that paper. For most literary papers, what I tend to do and what I do myself is I tend to deal with a topic that my paper is going to cover. So, for instance, if I was writing a paper about the story of an hour, it's about the relationship between a husband and a wife and how the wife view of their marriage is very different. So I might start off the paper talking about love and marriage. So that's a funnel lead because I'm starting off with something very big. But then what I might do is I'll narrow it down to the exact focus. Likewise, for that paper, you can do an anecdote lead where you can talk about a relationship between a husband and wife and then kind of lead that as a way to introduce what you want to say about the story of an hour. Um, Once you do the lead, you need a bridge. And what the bridge does is the bridge connects the lead to your thesis statement. Because what you want to do is you want to transition from that way you introduce your topic to your thesis statement, the claim that you're going to make. The last part and the most important part of an introduction is your thesis. The thesis is the argument that you're presenting in the paper. It is what you want to prove, it is what you want to illustrate. Now, I know there are some writing teachers who will tell you that a thesis doesn't have to be explicitly stated, and I agree with that. It doesn't. It has to be implied. But I think from the standpoint of a writer, it is better to have a explicit thesis because that lets you know what your paper is about. Because if you don't know what your paper is about, then you're not going to present a good argument. So that's your thesis. The rest of this thing is what I do is I give examples of what a good thesis is and a bad thesis is. So like for instance, let me go to my pointer. Like for instance, playing basketball is great. That's not a good thesis. I mean, it's okay, but it's not great. It's vague. But like for instance, a better thesis is playing basketball will improve athletic skills, because then that's the point that you want to prove. How basketball improves athletic skills. Look at some other ones. Like for instance, my topic is about the problems I had beginning high school. It's okay. But a better example is I had various problems when I began high school. So you really want to think about your topics, your thesis statement. There are some things that you want to make sure that there's some things, these are pet peeves that you don't want in your thesis. Like for instance, you don't want, in my opinion, I think that my paper is going to be about. Those are all kind of vague, fuzzy things. What you want to do in the introduction, you want to be specific. You want to make a claim that you can support. So take a closer look at that. On the rest of this handout, it gives you examples of introductions of the different leads. So it gives you an example of a funnel lead, the bridge, and the thesis. The lead is highlighted in yellow, the bridge is in green, the thesis is in blue. And so it gives you an example for all of the different types. So that's the funnel lead, the description lead, and the anecdote lead. So when you're reading over this document, take a closer look at those and read those very carefully because they'll show you different examples of how to do that. Let me go to body paragraphs and transitions. Okay, so your body paragraphs, and this is where I find that a lot of times students struggles. A body paragraph needs to have three parts. It needs to have a topic sentence, and that establishes what the main ideal of that paragraph is. So that topic sentence tells your reader this paragraph is about this. Then it needs supporting details. The supporting details are the most important part because what they do is they're the evidence that you're using to explain, illustrate, and support your main idea. It's the longest part of any paragraph. Here, you want to be certain that all your supporting details relate to that main topic, and you want to make sure that you give specific examples to support them. If you have any supporting details that are not related to your topic sentence, you need to take those out because that paragraph needs to be on one topic. Think of it this way. Let's say that I was writing a personal essay and I was writing about my family. And in my essay, I wanted to write about 3 members of my family. I wanted to write about my mother, my father, and my younger sister. So in the paragraph about my mother, everything in that paragraph should be about my mother. If I have a sentence or two in there about my father, that's not the topic of that paragraph. Those sentences about my father should be in the next paragraph where I discuss my father. And so those are the things that you want to keep in mind for your supporting details. For your concluding sentence, it serves a number of functions. It sums up your main ideal, what the whole paragraph has been, the main point that you want to make, and it should also connect back to your thesis, that main argument that's holding your paper together. And also the conclusion can serve as a transition to your next body paragraph. So for instance, in that example, if I was talking about my mother in the first paragraph, I can end that sentence and say, while my mother gave me stability and comfort, my father taught me responsibility and how to be a man. I can use that as a transition, and then the next paragraph begins with my father talking about him in more detail. You do want to make sure that you have transitions. What transitions do, they move your reader easily from one point to the next. There are easy ways to do transitions and more complicated ways to do transition. Easier ways are just to attach your new words such as accordingly, next, second, finally, meantime. A more complex way to do a transition is to take a sentence from the previous paragraph and use that to connect it to the next paragraph. So like, and if your last, it's like the example that I just gave with my mother and my father. So there's various ways to do transitions. That's that one. I know this is a lot of information, I'm sorry. But here we are now to the last one, and this is about writing conclusions. Just like introductions, writing conclusions can be very difficult. And one of the difficulties about writing conclusions is this. You want your conclusion to do more than just summarize everything that you just said. And I think more often than not, when we write conclusions, we tend to get into that trap. We just normally say in that last paragraph, well, this is everything that I just said. But that doesn't really do anything. What you want is you want the conclusion to still touch upon your main arguments and what your paper has presented, but you want it to do it in a new way. And so there are different ways that you can do this. You can use a quotation, but be careful with a quotation. Don't just stick it there. You need to make sure that that quotation is related to your main topic, but more importantly, you need to explain the connection of that quotation to your topic. And also, if you're going to end with a quotation, the last sentence and the last words of your paper should be yours and not the quotation. So you can give the quotation, but then explain the quotation and let you have the final words. So you'll see that in the example that I give here, where I begin with a quotation with William James. I give his quotation, but then the last part of the paper are my words, my thoughts. There are other things that you can do, such as present a climatic moment or lesson learned, connect the topic to the future, pose a meaningful question. Let me just say about the question, if you pose a meaningful question, you also want to make sure that you answer that question. So don't get into the habit of putting a question in your essay that you leave unanswered. And another one is to summarize your main argument or claim. I put this one last because this is the one that I feel that often gets us into trouble, because what we tend to do is we just repeat ourselves. Yeah, it's still a very effective way to conclude a paper. You just want to be careful here. Now, here's the deal. You're writing literary papers. So for your literary papers, these techniques might not work as well and they will need some tweaking. So like if you do a quotation, it would be a quotation probably from the short story or from the poem or something like that. If you do a climatic moment or lesson learned, you can do a moment from the literary work and show how that literary work, how that quotation or that moment from the literary work connects to the overall argument that you have made. So you can use these for a literary paper. However, here's the thing that I want you to remember. With a literary paper, your focus is on the literature. And this is going to sound somewhat mean, but for these papers, this is not a paper about you. It is not a paper about society in general or society at large. It's a paper focused on the literary work and what happens in there. So if you're writing about everyday use, your conclusion needs to focus on Maggie, D, and Mama. If you're writing about the lottery, you need to focus on the lottery. Now, that is not to say that you can't make connections to larger society, but you have to make sure that those connections to larger society make sense in the framework of your essay. I know that's kind of difficult to understand. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, I'm saying it in an abstract way, but when you write the paper, it'll probably make more sense. The last thing that I want to say about conclusions, two things, and these are my pet peeves. Do not start your conclusion with "in conclusion" or "to conclude" or "to sum up." I mean, not that this is wrong, it's not wrong, but stylistically, it's not great. Because here's the deal. When I get to the last paragraph of your paper, I know it's your conclusion. I turn the page, or in this case, I'm scrolling on my screen, I see the last paragraph, it's the conclusion. You don't need to tell me "in conclusion." In more cases, more often than not, if you just take out "in conclusion," that paragraph will work just fine. Also, the thing that you don't want to do in your conclusion, don't apologize. I find that sometimes what people tend to do is they apologize for their paper saying, these are just my opinions or I'm no expert on it. But here's the deal. When you write a paper, you are an expert. You've taken some time to think about this topic. It's yours. You invested time and energy into reading the source material, to writing your flaws down, to making sure that it's presented well. So take ownership of your work and be proud of what you've done. Especially when it comes to literary analysis, there are no right or wrong literary analysis. I mean, there are tons of scholars who have written analysis on literary works. One person says that is blue, another person says that is black, and they stand behind that. And so I want you two to stand behind your work. So there's also a quiz on writing introductions, body paragraphs, transitions, and conclusions. This quiz is true false. But once again, make sure that you read that quiz very carefully and the questions very carefully because you want to make sure that you're reading them correctly and that you completely understand. That is it for the lessons for today. As I said before, I'm a little bit behind on grading, but I will catch up. Fortunately, these two quizzes that I've given to you today will grade themselves. So it's not something that I have to do manually. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and attention. I hope that you have a good Wednesday, and I will see you tomorrow for tomorrow's lecture. All right, have a good one, everyone. Bye.